The idea to the book came by good luck. By coincidence, we received a USB stick by post, and we found a huge number of files and documents there. After publishing the book, some readers said that the numbers of MB here are small compared to Algerians, Moroccans, etc. But be aware, the numbers of Muslim brothers is very few. Only the elite gets public interest. There are about 2,000 Muslim brothers managing or running the association. Often is it said that the Muslim Brotherhood is moderate. I think the Muslim Brotherhood movement is the root and the origin of an epidemic and the root of fundamentalism. Qatar accompanied the revolutions raided by Muslim Brotherhood and also encouraged those uprisings. And now Qatar pays back for this adventure.
Dieu a scellé leur cœur. Salim. Et qu'est-ce que c'est Salim? Qui n'a pas été détérioré.
The Muslim Brotherhood hears of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of this movement. Now they are active in Gaza, Egypt and Syria, and of course in Tunisia and also in Libya. And also in Turkey through the AKP. Their failure to rule Egypt during the era of Mohammed Mursi sent the certificate of political Islam failure. The first high member of the Muslim Brotherhood who arrived here in Europe and played an important role here was Said Ramadan, Hassan al-Banna's son-in-law, and after his marriage with al-Banna's eldest daughter, he first escaped from Egypt to Syria, and after the unity between Egypt and Syria in 1958, he obliged to escape again and moved to Geneva. In fact, money runs smoothly and easily. Today we discover what surprised us, that Qatar for 10 years now is not only funding PSG football club, but also companies like Total. It also funds religious projects, and this is extremely surprising, while Qatar always underlined that it would not invest in religion. It is not our priority and not our field, they declared. But with the documents of Qatar papers, we realized that Qatar adopts a true religious project through Qatar Charity Foundation that constitutes the tool of a missionary orientation and penetrates through the Muslim Brotherhood network into Europe. And it was a shock to us. We never expected such a thing. A high-ranking member of the Muslim Brotherhood in France, his name is Mohamed Louisi. He was leader of the Muslim Brotherhood here, and 3 years ago he left the movement and wrote a book. There he said that the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, as he experienced it from the inside, is the same ideology as ISIS. And now he became one of the main enemies of the French Muslim Brotherhood and fears for his life. From an NGO focusing on humanitarian relief, funding in 70 countries, Qatar Charity has become a vague phase of projects of a religious nature linked to political Islam and with the support of associations linked to Europe, Asia and Africa, close to the Muslim Brotherhood movement. And that is an aspect that is not well defined, but it is important because it is based on the aid system and explained in the Qatar Papers book by us. It is a system that includes requests, responses and conditions, and that recommended by Qatar Charity before spending the money, and that system operates in 15 European countries, funded by 15 projects by Qatar Charity. In its vast majority, it is only for the benefit of Islamic organizations close to the Muslim Brotherhood. It is an obscure NGO interested in projects of a religious missionary nature through a program called Al-Gaith, targeting to establish Islamic centers in Africa, Middle East and Asia, but also in Europe. Only in Europe there are 145 centers, so we are talking about an organization that is active in charity and also religious activities. It is a common thing for Qatar to support the Muslim Brotherhood movement, using them as a kind of arm outside. And we know that the Qatari money plus savvy of the Muslim Brotherhood try in every way to influence the Muslim communities in Europe and to make them retract themselves, to create a parallel community hostile to the hosting society. The Muslim Brotherhood strikes European societies, strikes the individuality, and they try to infiltrate Arabs and Muslims who are living in Europe as followers. They have created societies that manage their activities in many European countries. There is a book in English, not translated into French, talking about a spider and a starfish, and describing the Muslim Brotherhood situation previously as a spider. Where there was a leader in Egypt, the spider dies as soon as its head is crushed. But as for the new method, which is actually coming from Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood resembled as the starfish with multiple arms. And when the arm is cut off, it grows as the others stay safe. That is the difference, and it is very essential. There is no longer an old leader at the age of 85 in Egypt deciding everything from there. This is no longer the case. Now, there are young people living in the West. They do not claim to be Muslim brothers. None of them say, "I am a Muslim brother." Tariq Ramadan, for example, never said that, and the British realized that much earlier than the French. It is always difficult finding a brotherhood stamp on a group member, because whenever we ask anyone, "Are you a Muslim brother?" he answers, "We are all brothers." Well, this is how they say it today, the new Muslim Brotherhood. That is They are not official members of the global organization or movement. They are attached ideologically and religiously. Sheikh Ramadan has always affirmed that he is not a brother. Nevertheless, he undoubtedly belongs to the Brotherhood's tradition, ideology and thought, because it is not easy to clarify and to clearly define the group's affiliation, but there are certain signs to guess. For example, it is adequate to check the libraries. So when we find the books of Sayyid Qutb, Sheikh al-Qaradawi and Hassan al-Banna, that is a clear signal. We discovered that these associations are linked to one another, to the Federation of Islamic Organizations in France, which in turn is linked to the Federation of Islamic Institutions in Europe, associated with the European Council for Fatwa and Research in Dublin, supervised by Sheikh al-Qaradawi. These connections intertwine and give a clearer picture. Without the need of a stamp or signature, it is an integrated ecosystem, not bothering if it is overtly a Muslim Brotherhood. Now, there are multiple figures almost everywhere. In our book we stress that the Brotherhood in Europe is an elite organization, in the sense that it does not include large numbers. There are about 1,000 in France and a few thousands in Europe, but they are very influential. They take important positions in associations, in municipalities, in universities. They are doctors and engineers, and so they influence others.
C'est complexe, on peut pas, il n'y a pas de lien.
It is more complicated. There is no link. There is just a connection. But there is no organizational link. The Muslim Brotherhood did not defend Al-Qaeda, although Al-Qaeda leaders came from the Brotherhood, and the same with ISIS. They do not support it because it would backfire to them again. So bombings do not make the Brotherhood more likable, so they oppose it. In addition, they are very, very patient people. Their idea is that it will take decades to gradually gain control over the Western world.
Organizations such as the Muslim Brotherhood and certainly the so-called political arm of Hezbollah that still can operate freely throughout Europe are one of these extremist groups that even if they propagate or claim not to advocate violence, ultimately propagate an ideology that is incompatible with our democracies and ultimately also fuels ideas and violence of terrorists.
Wir haben uns mit der Frage der Radikalisierung sehr intensiv auseinandergesetzt. Und letztendlich
We dealt with the question of radicalism very seriously, and as a result, we concluded to have a balancing act because the freedom of extremists is being used against us to make our society illiberal, to threaten, to kill people, as well as to win people for their criminal goals.
Als auch für ihre kriminellen Ziele Menschen zu gewinnen. Und in dem Zusammenhang
And in this context, there was a learning process in the European Parliament because the freedom of speech by some was understood in an absolute way for a long time.
Da hat's eine Veränderung.
There was a shift that freedom of speech is without any doubt a value of its own, except for some extremists.
Vielleicht ein paar Extremisten, keiner in Zweifel. Dass aber, wenn jemand zu Straftaten auffordert,
but if somebody is calling for a criminal act, like hate preachers, organizers of networks or organized crimes, then it's important to take the protection of the Constitution very seriously.
Die an solche Vereinigungen angegliedert sind, fast regelmäßig angegliedert sind, dann gilt es, das Thema Verfassungsschutz wirklich ernst zu nehmen.
Regarding Mulhouse, it is clear, as the mosque officials themselves mentioned to us, that it is strategically located in France and at the same time close to Germany and Switzerland. Therefore, it will interest a large Muslim community consisting of some hundreds of thousands of believers. The other reason for choosing Mulhouse is that the city is located in the Alsace-Lorraine region, and it is not covered by the separation of religion from the State Act of 1905, but under the exception of the Concordat, which means, unlike other French regions, the French state can fund mosques and churches in Alsace, and the Mulhouse municipality thus contributed to the support to the Mosque Al-Nour and twice donated 235,000 euros to the association. Then there is Al-Taqwa Bank, known as the Bank of Islamic Extremism, to which President George W. Bush referred to after the 9/11 attacks. There is also Youssef Nada, the banker of extremism in Europe. He still lives in Campione d'Italia. It is a tiny land in Switzerland, but it belongs to Italy. It overlooks Lake Lugano, and there I met that banker who was lavished with money, radicalization networks in Europe for many years. He was charged with terrorism, but Switzerland abandoned the pursuit. But nevertheless, it is known that the Bank of Al-Taqwa, which no longer exists, was a financial tool for the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe. Is a financial foundation of the state of Qatar, which is one of the main financial supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. One representative of the Qatar Foundation is chairman of the ethical board of the Deutsche Bank. The Deutsche Bank is worldwide one of the main global financial players. So this, for me and also for other experts, proved that there is a strategy of Qatar, like I said before regarding the strategy of the Muslim Brotherhood, going into the institutions of Western Europe, trying to undermine them from within. You can see the same structure in the business, in the economy of Western Europe, where Qatar is playing an increasing role. And here also the European member countries, the authorities have to act. It was really with great luck. We received a USB stick by mail, and in it we found a large number of internal documents for Qatar Charity, including correspondence from associations requesting assistance from Qatar Charity, responses from the latter, bank transfers, and, of course, also checks. Document surprised us, as it clarified the system of such an extensive financing network that included 140 to 150 projects in Europe, with the aid of more than 100 million euros. Within the last 5 or 6 years, let's say 10 years, it shows how Qatar Charity, and behind it Qatar, intensified its efforts and emphasized Islam in Europe in order to influence it. Qatar, through Qatar Charity, is intended to be an active player in the Islam market in Europe, as much as the Maghreb countries, Algeria and Morocco, but also Saudi Arabia and, more recently, of course, Turkey as well.
Following the money is always a good advice to any investigator. Obviously, there is a misconception. You often hear the notion that people sometimes get radicalized very quickly over the internet. That is unfortunately a misconception. No well-integrated young man or woman, whether Muslim or whatever other persuasion, will get radicalized by just watching a few ISIS videos. What may happen here is that this is the end point of a long radicalization process that may have started already at home, continued in schools, in maybe mosques, community centers, over television as well, over many years. And indeed, money is very important to really, that is being used to send over hate preachers, imams, teachers, etc., that are quite busy indoctrinating our young Muslim European community.
I think we turned a blind eye to Qatar for a long time, especially when Nicolas Sarkozy was president. Qatar was one of the good guys, but I think that the intelligence services paid attention a long time ago. However, the intelligence service includes only employees who do not make decisions, but they report what is happening. The authority of the country must act on the information received. And indeed, Qatar plays a fundamental role internationally, especially through the establishment of Al Jazeera. The French Islamic associations, such as the Union of Islamic Organizations, are not at all incubators of jihadists, but we know through recent events that there are an osmosis and channels between the jihadists and the Muslim Brotherhood. Osama bin Laden started with the Muslim Brothers, together with Ayman al-Zawahiri. He too. Deviation into a wrong path is possible. We saw that in Mulhouse. A girl member of the Mulhouse Mosque Association, which is the biggest project financed by Qatar Charity in Europe. That girl joined the jihadists. And there are also jihadists who were students at the Institute for Imams located near Château Chinon. So there are channels, but it would be an exaggeration to say that the Brotherhood movement is a school for graduating jihadists. In France, we talk a lot about Qatar. Overall, the French have a bad idea of Qatar. Therefore, they think that Qatar will not play an important role for a long time in political and economic life in France. Actually, what I notice it is that the basis for this excessive activity of Qatar is state terrorism. What is state terrorism? It is that the state establishes a repressive apparatus that knows no boundaries, restrictions, or any balance. And it can act freely. So, why do we say it is terrorism? Because the activities of those match or even exceed those of the largest known terrorist organization. I no longer have access to the files, since I am no longer in the system. But what we are talking about here paints a clear picture. And this is a picture of the harm and malice of real state terror. The Institute for the Initiation of the Imams of France and Europe, near Château Chinon, the Brotherhood founded it and they do not deny it. His former director himself, Mahmoud Zouahir, stated that he was one of them, and the Institute is a Muslim Brotherhood organization. In the interest of the Institute, money bags were passed from Switzerland to its headquarters near Château Chinon. These operations are documented by the intelligence services know some, but not all. We did not focus only on France and Switzerland, but also Norway, Sweden, Ukraine and Poland. And when we look at the map, we find it amazing. There are about 140 projects across Europe. Indeed, it was a surprise to us, since Qatar has always emphasized that we do not invest in religious matters. It is not one of our priorities and not our field of expertise. While documents of Qatar papers show that there is a real project of Qatar through Qatar Charity NGO that constitutes the instrument of Qatari missionary and penetrates into Europe through the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood in general, and now they are called Muslims in France, they are trying to turn Muslims into Islamists. With that, they control them. And they sell their votes. In other words, it is an electoral game. This is something for politicians, and French intellectuals find it very difficult to understand the Islamic phenomenon. They cannot know, because religion in France ended for them 3 centuries ago. Therefore, they consider that religious people in general are simple. And peaceful people as well. While this is not true, because we know how religion was used in violence and killing innocent people. They could accuse you of being anti-Semitic. Now they invented something else. You are accused of being anti-Islam or Islamophobe, while you're hostile to them and not anti-Islam. Islam is something else.
Must not forget that the topic of radicalization within the Islamic groups here in Europe is increasing. And mainly groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, countries like Qatar are supporting such a radicalization. So this is the reason why Europe has, and definitely has, to look more into those groups which try to educate young people here in Europe within their communities to radicalize, and at the same time trying to stop the financial structures of those communities which are funded by the Muslim Brotherhood, which are funded by countries like Qatar or even Turkey.
A more frank dialogue should be held on the financing of terrorism by elite private figures, and also the financing of Islam in France and Europe from non-governmental organizations like Qatar Charity. Other than that, are there other funding sources? What is secret, what is open? There are many forms of cash donations outside the law. Does the money come from after being ordered from Britain or Switzerland? Frankly, we do not know anything at present.
And I think certainly there is here a certain problematic that on the one hand there is the public good of religious freedom, and on the other hand there is a public good of protecting our values and our social cohesion. So I could imagine that some policymakers and governments may be hesitant to maybe cutting funding for such organization when it comes from abroad, or even prohibiting such organizations altogether, because they are hesitant to interfere in what they may consider the religious freedom. And I would argue that the indoctrination of young Europeans and radicalization of young Europeans is at least as much a question of national security as the potential takeover of a defense company. And so here we need to have a different approach and say that this is basically the indoctrination and the indoctrination of a violent ideology, of a radical ideology under the guise of religious freedom, which we ought not to allow, whether it would be a radical Christian or a radical Jewish sect or Hindu, whatever. It's not about Islam as such. It's about a radical ideology that undermines social cohesion, if we are lucky, and if we are unlucky, leads to violence and terrorism. I would find it very difficult to believe that we would allow the foreign funding of a far-right organization that would propagate similar views about condoning terrorism, of propagating execution of Muslims, of homosexuals, and vile anti-Semitism. So we need to be careful here, not to confuse religious freedom with actually a politicized radical ideology that might come under the guise of religion.
That means we observe no-go areas, districts where even the police does not have any kind of access, even when a crime was committed, where the rule of law is being replaced by so-called Sharia courts.
Rechtsstaatlichkeitsstrukturen zum Teil durch sogenannte Scharia-Richter abgelöst werden. Und meine große Sorge ist,
and my great concern is that when on the one hand structures like those exist, on the other hand structures of right-wing extremism will rise.
Sich Gegenstrukturen, die auch glauben, das Recht beachtet sowieso keiner mehr. Ich nehme das Recht jetzt in meine Hand. Wir führen die eigene Lynchjustiz ein.
Qatar's leaders have a huge appetite for bullying. They want to talk about it at any cost. It reminds me of one of La Fontaine's novels. You might know it. It is the story of a frog that wanted to grow up to become the size of a bull. Of course, you guessed it. Who is the frog and who is the cow? I mean, Saudi Arabia. It should be said that Qatar entered into a competition with Saudi Arabia in this field. But on one hand, it does not have the means. And on the other hand, Saudi diplomacy is more or less quite reasonable in this respect.
We also have the responsibility to open our arms, welcoming those parts of the society, and also being aware that many people who are having the Muslim faith are not radicals per se. Islam is a religion, a very liberal religion. Our society, Western Europe, is based on the so-called Enlightenment in the 16th and 17th century. And this Enlightenment has its basic in the Muslim world, because without the thinkers and the philosophers of the Muslim world, we wouldn't have the writings by Aristotle or Plato, which are now one of the bases of our culture here in our Europe, and also could define through their thinking our European values and the Charter of Fundamental Rights of Europe. So the Islam per se is a very liberal, open religion, and we have to be, in the Western European societies have to be aware of the fact. It's only groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, countries like Qatar who are supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, who are trying to change the basis of this theology, the basis of the Islam, by inventing verses of the Quran or papers or written statements by Muhammad and his predecessors saying that the Jews are pigs, that Christians have to be slaughtered. No, this is not the fact. This is not written in the holy books of the Quran, and this is not written by scholars of the Islam world.